Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another week and another edition of the 2022 SEC Talk. We are back kicking off a big weekend here in the SEC. We have two ranked matchups in the SEC as we are full on into SEC play. And once again, joining me for another great week is Wade. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yep, looking forward to this weekend's slate of college football within the SEC and nationwide. We have some really good matchups.
Yeah, absolutely. Seven ranked matchups that we have in college football. So this is definitely Statement Saturday. And before we get into those games, let's start off with the SEC teams in the AP Top 25 poll here. We'll get things rolling as we always do here on the show. And we have a new number one. It is number one Georgia. They are back on top after Alabama ekes out another victory against Texas A&M. So not only does Georgia top over Alabama, but Ohio State is now the number two team in the country. That means Alabama fell from the number one to the number three, so they sit at number three before their ranked matchup against number six Tennessee, who Tennessee has moved up two spots and moved up two spots after drubbing LSU in Death Valley this past weekend. Ole Miss stays the same at number nine after their road win against Vanderbilt. Mississippi State jumps up a couple of spots. Another really good, fantastic showing that they had against Arkansas at home. And then Kentucky is falling from grace. We saw this same team at number 8 a couple of weeks ago, and then two straight losses to Ole Miss, and now to who did they lose to? To South Carolina. My gosh, I just got off of a show, so my brain might not be working this show as it always does. But so Kentucky rounds out the top 25, and the two teams that fell out of the poll was Arkansas and also LSU. So we've seen two SEC teams move out of the polls. So those are your remaining teams heading into week 7. All right, let's get into our reminders portion of the show, where if you want to ask any questions, definitely feel free to comment whatever question or statement that we have on the show. We'll put it up here on the screen. We'll answer it on the spot. So whatever you have, whether it's SEC or just anything college football, definitely be sure to put it out there. And our reminder segment is brought to you by Fanatics. So you can use our link there, as you see on the screen, /scramble. And today's code, I already looked it up, is CAMP. It is CAMP.
It's not Acorn.
Yeah, all uppercase, not Acorn as it was on Sunday night. But you can use that, use up to 65% off. You can use that on all of your SEC gear. I'm sure that, whenever that Alabama-Tennessee game comes around, you're going to be wanting that fresh, clean-looking orange shirt whenever they orange out Neyland this weekend. So with that, let's go dive into some SEC fantasy this week before we get into the actual recap. Let's go towards the rules here of SEC fantasy. Pretty much the same rules that we've been running with. No changes if you've been with us since the start. We have one quarterback, one running back, one wide receiver, a defense, and then as always, our really weekly rule that we have here, can't have any of the same players. So you can't have Will Levis back-to-back or Bryce Young back-to-back. So we will hop on now to SEC fantasy recap here as we move on to SEC fantasy here. So let's move on here to the recap. Okay, the screen's a little bit laggy on my screen, so sorry that if I have to wait a little bit here. So sorry about all that. I still have the SEC fantasy rules on my screen. Don't know what's on your screen.
I've got the recap pulled up.
Yeah, we have SEC fantasy week 6 recap. Sorry for any lag that we're experiencing here, but we both got into the negatives here. It was not a good year, not a good week. I really jinxed it, so you can really put this one on me. Literally last week I said, oh boy, we haven't seen any negatives this year. Well, we saw 2. So why don't you take it away with how your team did and how you got into the negatives this week?
Yeah, just like how the internet's lagging, our teams were lagging.
Yeah.
Neither team really got it going. For me, it was the Alabama defense that disappointed. As y'all know, we add up the skill players' yardage and we subtract the defensive yardage. So if your defense doesn't have a good week, that can really cost you. So Hendon Hooker, he had a very good game for Tennessee. He stretched the field a few times, took some deep shots, made some plays with his legs. Absolutely a great performance by him in Baton Rouge this past Saturday. And hate to say it, but he might even need a bigger one this Saturday against Alabama. But 239 yards in the air, nothing too shabby. Quinshon Judkins, my running back from Ole Miss, he split time on Saturday with Zach Evans. We've seen that kind of develop all season, both of those guys getting their touches. But Judkins did have 46 yards on the ground and I believe 2 touchdowns. So, doesn't tell the whole picture here. He had a good game for the Rebs. Ra Thomas, this was a little bit of a head scratcher. It's like he wasn't even on the field. For Mississippi State against Arkansas, of course, the Bulldogs lit it up in the air. They threw the ball all over the place with Will Rogers, but they were able to get Jaden Walley and Cameron Ducking and a few other guys more involved, and Ra Thomas just made 1 catch for 9 yards. The Alabama defense, they struggled against Texas A&M, really made Texas A&M and Haynes King look like a formidable offense, which we all know they really just aren't. So to let up 323 yards was uncharacteristic for the Crimson Tide. So you do the math, and I end up at negative 29 yards, the first trip to the negatives for either one of us this season. So you're definitely looking to the bounce back from that.
Yeah, so we see right there you have negative 29 yards. We'll see if that will hold up for your second win here on the season as you move it to the screen from another. I mean, you see it right there. Negative 103 yards for my fantasy team this week. A not good week here in week 6 for both of us. Like I mentioned, both of the negatives. And on your side, Ra Thomas, if he gets, a couple more yards and you're out of the negatives, I really don't have an excuse because Anthony Richardson did not have a good game at all, only 66 yards for the Florida quarterback. Running back was pretty much the only positive for me in week 6. Jahmyr Gibbs, I really expected him to have another big game. He's just been really a positive stretch here for the Alabama running back. He's really been the offense for Alabama, especially with the backup quarterback in as well. Wide receiver, Malik Nabers, he was the leading receiver for the Tigers. And, I said the key was for LSU to get the passing game going, but I don't even think it would have mattered. Tennessee was just a better team on Saturday. And then my defense, Ole Miss, man, they let me down, giving up 400 yards to Ole Miss, 403 that is, to Vanderbilt, and 28 points. So Ole Miss struggled in the first half. So negative 103. So hopefully I'll leave this week in the rear view mirror here as we'll go on to our SEC fantasy draft, which is presented by Buffalo Bayou Brewing Company. If you're down there in Houston, they're coming off of a big walk-off win there in Houston. I know that Chet texted us. So I'm sure that Buffalo Bayou is popping off right now after the Astros just walked off the Mariners in week 1. So we'll move on to the SEC fantasy draft to the quarterbacks, and you're going with Jackson Dart, who's coming off of a 448-yard passing game against Vanderbilt, as Ole Miss will face Auburn's defense has been struggling as of late.
Yep, that's right. I'm going to go with Mr. Dart while he is throwing darts and is hot. He 450 yards passing. Let's just give him the 2 yards to keep it simple. Just a kind of the performance that we were awaiting for him all season for Ole Miss. And, against Vanderbilt, I get it. You can stretch the field a little bit more than you can against some other teams. But this Ole Miss offense looked as good as it's been all year. Him and Jonathan Mingo had great chemistry. I think Jonathan Mingo had 250 receiving yards.
Yeah, he had pretty much half of what Jackson Dart threw for last week. And like you mentioned, my quarterback in Hendon Hooker, he was was due for another big game on the road against LSU. Well, he's going to have the game of his life if Tennessee wants to beat Alabama for the first time in 12 years. I thought about going with Will Rogers. That's just too much of a boring pick here. I'm going to go with Hendon Hooker. I think that the lights aren't going to be too bright for Hendon Hooker against Alabama's defense. So I think that Hooker, once again, will be able to roll against an Alabama defense that's very formidable. And I will go on to the running backs here as we go on to see who we got in week number 7 here, the running backs. Why don't you start off with your guy in week 7?
I'm going to go with the familiar face here, Raheem Sanders. He really just needs to be Arkansas's workhorse back while KJ Jefferson is nursing an injury. I don't know if Jefferson will be back this week, but either way, the Hogs have a tough road test against BYU, and I think it's going to be a grinded out football game. So look for Sanders to have upwards of 20 carries. And I think that Sanders, bold take, he needs at least 150 yards if Arkansas wants to win this football game. So I'm going to put it on the line here and give him the start at running back.
Yeah, Sanders has pretty much been really the focal point of that Arkansas offense during their 3-game losing stretch. I'm going to go with a new face here on SEC Fantasy. He is a transfer, I believe, from Arizona State, I believe. Now he's at Florida. He is a sophomore running back. Coming off of a touchdown game against Missouri, 86 yards, going up against the LSU defensive front, that just gave up like 250 yards rushing to Tennessee offense. So LSU's defensive line has been a little concerning as of late against the run. So I think that Montrell Johnson, I think that Florida, especially with Anthony Richardson struggling the past couple of weeks, they're going to want it to really feed Johnson on the ground. I think that Johnson will have another good game there at the Swamp. So I'm going to give it to the sophomore and Montrell Johnson being my running back this week. Now let's go on to the pass catchers. We have more Rocky Top love here on the show as you're going with Bru McCoy, the transfer from USC, and boy, didn't he light up the LSU secondary on Saturday.
He did. Bru McCoy has really burst onto the scene. Started the year as Tennessee's wide receiver number 3. But, our guy, Cedric Tillman, went down with a foot injury. So he is currently unavailable for the Vols. He could come back this week, but I don't think that they'll push it for him to play against Alabama. So Bru McCoy has really settled in nicely, and really him and Shane Hyde are wide receiver 1 and 1A for the Tennessee Vols. And I think that McCoy might draw Alabama's second corner this weekend, which is an intriguing matchup for me because, Tennessee's going to have to stretch the field if they want to beat Alabama. And I just realized you and I could have swapped receivers because when your quarterback's throwing to McCoy, mine's going to be throwing to Mingo.
Yeah, we're going to be it's going to be conflicting whenever you're rooting for Jackson Dart, I'm going to be rooting for him as well to get Jonathan Mingo. And then for Hendon Hooker, you're going to be rooting for him to get McCoy. But, yeah, like you mentioned, Tennessee's offense without Cedric Tillman hasn't really skipped a beat. So I think that McCoy is going to be due for another big game. Definitely going to be needed if they want to beat Alabama. Like I mentioned, we're going to go Jonathan Mingo coming off of a 248-yard receiving game. So I don't think that he's going to get that. It's definitely going to be tough against Auburn secondary. That really played Georgia well. The scoreboard was 42-10, but their offense just wasn't enough for that game. But I think that Jonathan Mingo has become Jackson's Dart favorite target. I think that Mingo is going to be due for another big game against Auburn this weekend. And then to finish it out, the good old defenses. Our defenses last week did not have a good week. Alabama gave up 323. Ole Miss giving up 403. You're going with a new face here on SEC Fantasy for 2022, going to go with Mississippi State, which is a defense that hasn't really been talked about. The spotlight's on their offense, but I think a lot of people need to turn their attention to this defense.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Mississippi State here. Like you said, the defense has really stepped it up, and they've had, I think, 3 straight weeks of holding opponents under 20 points. So I think the LSU game was really a wake-up call for Mississippi State, and honestly, even in the LSU game, if they could eliminated a few big plays, we'd be talking about an undefeated football team. So I think Mississippi State is an underrated unit within the SEC, certainly a upper half defense, maybe a top 5 defense in the conference. And this is a good matchup for them against Kentucky. We don't know if Will Levis will be playing, but even if he is, I think that the Bulldogs can contain him and keep this to be a low-scoring game, at least on their side. But, we know Mississippi State can score some points.
Now, I got to hear your reasoning. I know that you were the number 1 pick. Why didn't you go with Georgia's defense against Vanderbilt?
Honestly, I was just so enamored with what Jackson Dart did last week for Ole Miss, and then what Bru McCoy did last week against LSU. I mean, I saw it right there with my own eyes and just had a gut feeling he'd have a big game. But Georgia is playing Vanderbilt, so always definitely the safe bet would have been to take the other Bulldogs.
Yeah, this is 2 weeks I'm fading the Vanderbilt offense. It didn't work out for me last week, but I'm going to go with Georgia's defense. They played really solid against offense that struggled. So I'm going to roll Georgia. I think that they're a safe pick, but you never know. It's SEC, anything can happen. But I'm going to roll with we're rolling with both of the dogs this week, and so let's see if these both defenses have that dog in them in week 7. So now let's recap a busy week 6 in the SEC. Really all conference games in week 6, and we're going to start off with a little morning coffee here in Baton Rouge. I know that Wade, you attended this game, Jacob as well. So Tennessee, you didn't read that score wrong. 40-13 against the Tigers of LSU, and you could have had many player of the games in this one, but I went Jabari Small in this one. 22 carries, 127 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The running game and the passing game was really just going. And from the start, Jack Bech fumbles the opening kickoff, and then from there, it was just all Tennessee in this one. So you're at the stadium. Why don't you give us a little of the atmosphere and then the game itself?
Good old Rocky Top, Tennessee.
Heard a lot of that,
That's all I heard all day. I gotta say, Tennessee came to play, and like you said, from the opening kickoff, getting on the board early for Tennessee. I mean, they were up like 21-0 after a quarter. So tough stuff for LSU. I mean, it just never felt like this team had a chance to get it going. The defense had to start 3 straight drives within the 25-yard line. Early kickoff, it just was a recipe for a disaster. Definitely a point where LSU looked like they were crawling back into it. We've seen LSU start slow pretty much every game this season except for Southern. And, they had a chance to make it a one-possession ball game, but couldn't convert a crucial 3rd and 4th down on a drive right before the half, and then let Tennessee score with like 5 seconds left in the half. So that was pretty much the dagger. And Tennessee just looked like a really legit football team. We'll talk about the big showdown against Alabama, but I think the sky's the limit for the Vols.
The sky's the limit for the Vols. And you know me, I've been high on this Tennessee team. They showed why on Saturday morning in a hostile environment that was very quiet from the start to the finish. I mean, LSU, that Tiger Stadium, you heard more Tennessee fans the whole entire game, and this is the reason why. They just really put it on. The offense was on, and the defense, that's been struggling. I think the bye week helped them, and we'll see if the defense can continue that against Alabama offense. So we'll probably get a healthy Bryce Young back going into week 7. So the next game in the SEC is between the Hogs and the Dogs as Arkansas face number 23 Mississippi State. And once again, we see Mississippi State making a statement win. I mean, this LSU, they lose to LSU, and this was a wake-up call for Mississippi State. Put up 40 points once again on our Arkansas team that's on a 3-game losing skid. As you see there, I feel like every week Will Rogers is our player of the game, but he's just continued to light it up. 395 yards and 3 touchdowns. Arkansas, KJ Jefferson didn't play in this game, the backup. And you could just see from the jump, Mississippi State was just a better football team from the start. But, man, Mississippi State's looking very scary after that loss.
Yeah, a lot to play for the Bulldogs. Definitely took care of business against Arkansas. Another team that got off to a really hot start and just didn't look back. But I got to say, Marks, their running back, they really got him involved as well. I mean, mostly as a receiver, but I think he had over 100 yards receiving coming out of the backfield. So, they're not going to run it up the middle or between the tackles, but they definitely do get their running backs involved. And I think that's a layer of this offense that people do forget about. I mean, they're not taking deep shots after deep shots. They're working crossing seams. They're working halfback screens. They really attack you within the first 10 to 15 yards of scrimmage. And then that sets up, the deep shots that they can take.
Yeah, State's offense can beat you in many ways. So the next game that we'll go to is the battle of the SEC East. Missouri team, that we just saw a week ago. They really battled the number one team, Georgia. Was all the way, from start to finish. It seems like that Missouri is gonna beat them. And you picked this upset. It did almost happen, but the Florida Gators and Montreal Johnson on the ground, 86 yards on 8 carries and a touchdown. And like I mentioned, Anthony Richardson, my fantasy SEC fantasy quarterback for the week, only had 66 yards. Didn't even throw for a touchdown. He did throw an interception. I mean, we do give a lot of discredit to this Missouri defense, but ever since that Kansas State game where they gave up 40 points, Missouri's defense has been a very solid defensive front against a very really good Florida team, especially on the running game. But Missouri, was able to hang around, but Florida, the game that really changed was that pick six thrown in the second half. Florida's defense was able to do it. So you almost had it in this Missouri upset. We'll see if you had another upset. We'll have to see if that worked out for you. But what are your thoughts on this game? Were you more impressed with Missouri in this game, or Florida edging out a victory at home?
I mean, it's always good to win the football game. So kudos to the Gators, but Missouri did come in as I expected them to do and into battle. This is the third straight week that Missouri came up just short. Played kind of above their capabilities. So, they still have some winnable games on the schedule. They'll line up against South Carolina, I believe, next. Both teams are on a bye. And they have a game against Arkansas that all of a sudden looks winnable. And then, of course, a few tough games against, I think, Tennessee and maybe Kentucky. So, and I don't think they've played Vanderbilt yet. So, still a lot to play for Missouri, but unfortunately, they've come up short for the third straight week.
Like you mentioned, Missouri will head to the bye week, and Florida will face LSU in their annual rivalry game. And the next game we'll go to is Florida's rival themselves. It is the Georgia Bulldogs, the oldest Deep South rivalry that we saw here. Georgia and Auburn, and Georgia absolutely dominated this one from the start to the finish. And I'm just wondering when is going to be time for Brian Harsin to go. I'm sure Auburn fans are wondering that as well. And you saw there Branson Robinson, the running back, 12 carries and 98 yards and a touchdown. But I have to go to that Stetson Bennett run. That man has wheels. He took off for 66 yards in the second half to really blow this one open for Georgia. Georgia's defense really needed this one to bounce back after, Missouri team was able to score on them, get some big plays. Auburn wasn't able to do much. But Georgia, Stetson Bennett didn't have a single passing touchdown. They really relied on their running game, and that's exactly what they did, and they scored 42 points. So this was definitely a nice bounce back after 2 straight weeks. We saw a Georgia team really fall flat.
Yeah, this is the first time we've really seen the Bulldogs use their running game. I mean, usually Georgia is one of the leading rushing teams in the country, but this year, not so much. They've gotten their running backs involved as pass catchers, but this was the first time we've seen someone just grind it out on the ground for the Bulldogs. Several guys, actually. I think they had over 200 team rushing yards. So, maybe this Georgia offense is evolving a little bit. We kind of saw them stall against Kent State and against Missouri in the previous weeks. So for them to be a little bit more balanced, take some pressure off Stetson Bennett, let him get back to his bread and butter, spreading it to the tight ends and taking shots accordingly. But 42 points, hard to argue. Georgia, to me, they look like, they're in contention for that one spot.
Yeah, definitely. This statement win really was the needed, bunch to move over Alabama and Ohio State for that number one spot. And we'll go on to the next SEC game in Week 6, and that is going to be the Ole Miss Rebels. And this game was very close in the first half. Vanderbilt was up going into the half, and then Ole Miss and Jackson Dart really took over 448 yards on the day, 3 touchdowns. We could have gave like 2 players of the game in this one. Jonathan Mingo had 248 and 2 touchdowns as well. And in the running game, I mean, Zach Evans, Quinshon Judkins, everything was just working for this Ole Miss offense, especially in the second half. 52 points they put up against a Vanderbilt defense that's been struggling. And Vanderbilt's offense was able to score in the first half, but in the second half, they were really dominated by an Ole Miss defense that continues to impress. So very impressive win on the road against a Vanderbilt team that continues, to go downward after a really nice start to the season. But man, Ole Miss is getting a lot of hype so far.
Yeah, I mean, Vanderbilt gave it their all in the first half. They looked really impressive offensively. Mike Wright was back in there for the Commodores. But Lane Kiffin coached his guys up at the half, and they really came out swinging. So letting up 28 points is a little concerning because this Ole Miss defense has really looked like one of the better units in the SEC. But more importantly, I think we're starting to see this Ole Miss offense play to its fullest potential, which is great timing considering what's coming up for the Rebels. So a solid win on the road here for Ole Miss. And, we've seen this before. LSU let up like 35 on the road to Vanderbilt a few years ago and scored 70. So, Ole Miss, nothing to be ashamed of. I think they're on the right track. And certainly, I mean, they look like a top 10 team.
Yeah, all Lane Kiffin needed to do to wake up his team was change his hoodie, and that's exactly what he did. So definitely impressive win on the road in Nashville for Ole Miss. We'll go on now to the upset of the week. You called it. How about them Gamecocks, baby?
How about them Gamecocks?
24 to 14, and no Will Levis in this game. But even without Will Levis, you expected that Kentucky would still win this game, but that was not such. So why don't you dive into how South Carolina and Shane Beamer was able to pull off this upset on the road?
Well, coming into the year, we thought South Carolina would be led by a big-time passing attack with Spencer Rattler coming into the fold. But, South Carolina realized over the last few weeks that they really got to be a ground-first team, and Marshawn Lloyd has really just emerged as one of the better runners in the SEC, kind of like we saw Kevin Harris do a few years ago for the Gamecocks. And I think that the better he plays, obviously the better the team will play, but eventually I think that it will create some opportunities for Spencer Rattler as teams will have to respect the run. So very solid win here for the Gamecocks. The defense looked impressive. I know it was against a true freshman quarterback, but you still have to go get the job done, and you still have to stop Chris Rodriguez in that rushing attack, which can beat anybody. So a very impressive win for South Carolina. I mean, you just kind of felt like they were due to beat Kentucky. It's been like 6 years. So good job for the Gamecocks.
Good job indeed. Kudos to that South Carolina defense. Like you mentioned, freshman quarterback, no freshman quarterback. They were able to force the timely turnovers. And like you mentioned, Marshawn Lloyd has just been the X factor for the South Carolina offense. And it's, I think that Spencer Rattler, as you look at the stat line, okay, he had like 200 yards and a touchdown, but it was definitely a very solid performance for Spencer Rattler. Definitely needed. I think that South Carolina is going to be a team. You look on schedule, and they're going to surprise some people. And Kentucky got their bell rung on Saturday, so Kentucky is falling from grace. I think that South Carolina with Shane Beamer is definitely going to be a program on the rise. So we'll end things off here on Week 6 with our Saturday nightcap here on CBS between Texas A&M and number 1 Alabama. I think a lot of people thought that this was going to be a blowout, including myself, but Jimbo once again continues to play his best game and call his best game well until the last play. I don't know what he was thinking of that play call. You got to give it to Devin Achane there. I don't care if you get stopped. If you're going to lose, by your best player. But Alabama, the key for this one is Bryce Young being out. And Milroe, he played an okay game. Too many turnovers, though, for Alabama. I feel like Alabama was just trying to give Texas A&M the game. 4 turnovers and then 2 missed field goals by Will Reichard, which is a guy who, never misses, but he missed 2 times. But this was a very defensive battle between these two teams. And once again, Alabama, they had 1 life spent. Again, the Texas game, this is their 2nd life spent. So we'll see if they get the 3rd life and survive in Knoxville this weekend. But who are you more? I'm sure that you were more impressed with A&M than you were Alabama in this matchup.
Yeah, I thought A&M looked really good. I mean, Haynes King came back in and played a respectable football game for the Aggies. I mean, Max Johnson kind of took his job, and Johnson got hurt. So the quarterback battle lives on for Texas A&M. But they did a lot of things right in this one, and they hung in there and almost knocked off Alabama yet again, and this time on the road. So a good job by Texas A&M. This is the kind of performance we expected from them, in the preseason, but we kind of lost some hope in them. But this is a team that can still end up playing for a lot. I mean, the Sugar Bowl or something in that regard is still within reach.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to be it for our week 6 recap. But before we move on to week 7, we have one more thing in week 6, and that is our pick'em results.
The upset specialist.
Yes, you are the upset specialist. You got us. You picked up I think really the game that set you apart was Tennessee win over LSU. That got you a game. And Kentucky, that got you a game as well. So 9-2. Congratulations for your win. Your upsets. You win pretty much, well, in your upsets, you went 1-1. And picking Tennessee was definitely the right one. Me and Chet were pretty much picking the same teams last week, so both at 8-3. So all three respectable ones, but for back-to-back weeks, you get it on pick
I think I had an
results.
out-of-conference upset too, but I can't remember who I took.
I believe you took TCU as well.
Yeah, I took TCU over Kansas.
Yeah, you're the only one who took TCU over Kansas in that one. So you definitely were able. It was some questionable calls, but you made the right calls to take it in week 6. So we'll now head to week 7 games and picks, which is presented by Norse Beers. And if you want a beard like the Vikings, you can head on over to www.norsebeards.com and use promo code OCS for 25% off of all your Beardsman products. All right, another week to go as we have the week 7 games in the SEC. We'll start off with, this is all conference games except for one. We have an out-of-conference matchup, which is very interesting. We'll get to that in a minute. But we have Auburn at number 9, Ole Miss. And I'm looking at both of these offenses. Man, they are different. Auburn cannot score against really any defense in the SEC. And then Ole Miss, Jackson Dart coming off of the game of his life against Vanderbilt. So I'm pretty sure this should be easy for you, unless you're going to go for an upset. But are you going to go Ole Miss or go Auburn?
Well, we talked about it in SEC fantasy. I really need Jackson Dart to have a good game. You need Jonathan Mingo to have a good game. I think they will. I mean, like we said, this Ole Miss offense is kind of starting to evolve a little bit. They've got their standard 2 running back system that they've thrived with in the past, and they got Jackson Dart who can throw for 300 on you and run for 100 on you. So starting to look really dangerous there in Oxford, and I think that we see another good showing from the Rebels.
Yeah, the first couple of weeks, we saw the emergence of the running game. Jackson Dart, we were saying, okay, when is this big game coming? He has this big game. So I think, man, if Jackson Dart can do it every week, then Ole Miss is going to be unbeatable at this rate, especially with the way that their defense has been playing outside of last week. But I don't think this one's going to be close. I just don't think that Auburn's defense is going to be able to really respond to really a balanced attack that Ole Miss's offense has become. And they won't be able to score either. I think that Ole Miss gets the job done in the Grove, in Oxford. So give me Ole Miss in this one fairly easily in this one. And Chet's going to go with the Mississippi School, go with Ole Miss. So all saying go Rebs this week as we're a clean sweep on the Rebels. And then we're going to go on to the next matchup here in week 7, and that is Vanderbilt at number 1 Georgia. So we'll see if, Chet, once again, he's picked Vanderbilt over Alabama before. We'll see if we'll have it again, but I'm sure you're going to go with – actually, hold up. We have Alabama at Tennessee. My bad. I mixed it up.
I thought I skipped a slide.
No, I thought you skipped a slide as well. But, all right, this is our SEC game of the week. Sorry about that. I was, trying to rush through the banners here. So this is our SEC Talk game of the week. I'm honestly happy that we're doing this one first before Vanderbilt and Georgia. This is the game of the year. I think that's going to be whoever this one will pretty much lock up. Whether in the SEC East, if you're Tennessee, you win this one, you're in the driver's seat. I know that you still have to play Georgia, but if you're Alabama, you win this one. Looking pretty good in the SEC West. So are you going to go with Tennessee, to fight off some demons? They have not beaten this team in Alabama for nearly a decade. Are you going to go with the Tide? Just continue to roll on. So who you got?
Well, I was really impressed by Tennessee this past weekend. They look like a complete football team, led by one of the best quarterbacks in the conference, Hendon Hooker. To me, it really comes down to if Bryce Young plays or not. I mean, I've seen indications that he will be playing, but I think that he'll truly not get a full week of practice in. So that's going to be tough to game plan for Tennessee. I mean, this is a really good team to not get your reps in. But on the flip side for Tennessee, you got to train all week like you are playing Bryce Young. And it might be Jalen Milroe that walks out that tunnel and he brings a different element to the game, a lot more physicality as a runner. So it's tough to scheme for, certainly. But they could just turn to their guy, Hendon Hooker, and watch film on him because that's a pretty similar player. So they do have a little bit of an advantage there. But yeah, I just think it comes down to that Tennessee's the hot team right now, and Alabama's gotten lucky twice against the two Texas schools. So I think that in a tough road environment, Rocky Top will be blaring and Neyland will be rocking. So I think Tennessee gets the victory, but on to the next one because they got to play Georgia here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think for Tennessee side, it feels like the biggest home game in a decade. I mean, this game means everything. If you're a Tennessee fan, if you win this one, then your playoff hopes are still alive. SEC title is still in the works. I think that on Alabama's side, I think that Bryce Young will play in this game. I think that they were just trying to get him a week healthy. They're probably like, oh, Texas A&M, we're going to beat them easily, and then Texas A&M almost upsets them. But like I mentioned, Alabama has dominated the series, but I think that this is Tennessee's best chance, especially with their offense. I think my main concern is Tennessee's defense. I know they did a good job against LSU, but LSU's offense isn't that great. I mean, you look back at the Florida game, Anthony Richardson threw for 450, and you go to the next week, Missouri lets up like 66 against them. So it's a week by week basis. I know it's that, but I think I'm seeing a lot of people going with Tennessee. I think that Tennessee, I know, is not the favorite in the point spread, but I feel like this is just a sense that Alabama is the underdog in this one. A lot of people are picking Tennessee, so I'm going with Alabama and Nick Saban. I think that there's a lot of hype with Tennessee. I think that Bryce Young shows why he won the Heisman last year as a game. I think that Alabama's offense will be able to score. Tennessee's offense will be able to score. What does that equal? A lot of points. I think it's going to be like a 38-35 type of game. It's going to be similar to the Florida-Tennessee score. I think that Alabama party in Knoxville. So, Tennessee, if you're a Tennessee fan, you should be thanking me because I didn't want to put 3 T's up here and really curse y'all. So that's really what I went with. I think that Tennessee has a really good shot, but Chet also is going to go with the big power T. So you have 2 Rocky Tops and then 1 rolling with the top myself. So we'll move on now to Vanderbilt, Georgia. Sorry about the mix up there.
A little less hype here.
Less hype here. This should be a pretty easy pick for us, Vanderbilt and Georgia. I'm sure you're going to be pulling up the G.
Yep, definitely no hesitation here. This is the Dunn Franco Bowl here. My uncle, he has degrees from Vanderbilt and Georgia, so if he's watching, a little bit of a house divided there for him. But if I were him, I would invest in a good Georgia hoodie and ride the momentum to a national championship.
Yeah, ride with the dogs in this one. Vanderbilt's going to have no shot in this one. Give me the dogs at home, especially between the hedges. And Chet is actually going to be smart this time, not pick Vanderbilt over a number 1 team like he did a couple of weeks ago. He's going to roll with the dogs as well. So 3 Georgia logos that you see on the screen as we're rolling with consistent picks outside of the Alabama-Tennessee game. So like I mentioned, we do have an out-of-conference game. This is a very interesting, and it's an interesting road trip as well. Arkansas, who's a team that's lost 3 straight, has to go on the road to BYU, has lost 2 straight. So both of these teams are on the downward spiral, but it's a tough road trip. BYU's wearing some sick helmets. If you have not looked at that, go look at it. Those are the most sick helmets I've seen. They got like a cougar implemented in the helmet. So are you going to go with the SEC here? Or are you going to go with the Independent and BYU?
BYU had a tough showing against Notre Dame last week in Las Vegas, but they did upset Baylor and they lost on the road against Oregon. So it's kind of hard to see where this team's at, but I do think they're a very talented bunch, and I think this is a tough road game for Arkansas. I mean, of those games I just mentioned, the one that was at home, BYU won. So I think there's value to that. I think it's kind of weird timing. Arkansas is kind of coming off some losses that we didn't see coming. And then they have a few really big games coming up in the SEC. So it's kind of weird to go all the way out to Utah without a bye week or anything like that. And then you mix in that KJ Jefferson's questionable. And there's just not a lot to like for Arkansas here. So I'm going to go with BYU in this one.
Yeah, we've seen BYU face a SEC team a couple of years ago. Mississippi State traveled up there. Wasn't a sloppy game, went into overtime. BYU won that game, but I'm going to go with BYU. Like you mentioned, I don't really the status of KJ Jefferson doesn't look great going into this game. I think that Raheem Sanders, if really he doesn't get going, then I don't think that Arkansas is going to score that much. BYU's defense has been pretty good. They've had their games where they've given up some points in their Dame game, the Oregon game where they almost gave up 40 points. But I just think that Arkansas, I mean, their defense has been struggling as well. I just think that as a whole, the team, after their hot starts, have been struggling as well. I just got to go BYU. It's a tough road trip, to go from SEC play to, 1 week and now face, BYU team that's a very physical bunch. So I'm going to go BYU. And Chet's going to stick with SEC. He's going to call the Hogs one more week, go with Arkansas. I can see it happening. But he's going to go. I'm happy about this. No all you for this one. So I'm glad that Arkansas is on Chet's side. So 2 Cougars and 1 Hog. Let's see who gets it done. And now we'll go on to probably the most craziest and wackiest rivalry games that's been in the past couple of years. 2 years ago, obviously, the shoe game. And then last year, high scoring shootout. Both teams score in the 40s. Anthony Richardson was in the game. What was the starting quarterback name? My gosh, Emory Jones was benched in that game. Obviously, some of the guys on LSU side, Max Johnson's no longer there. But do you see that happening with another high scoring shootout, or do you have this being the normal LSU Florida game where both teams will be in the 20s, like 24-17, something like that? Are you going to go with the Gators at home, go with the Tigers on the road?
I do think it'll be a much more lower scoring game this go around. I think probably the first team to get to 27 or 28 points will win it. With that being said, I'm going to go with Florida in this one. I think that it will be a low scoring game, and I think LSU is just really going to struggle to move the ball. Give me the Gators 27, LSU 21.
Yeah, LSU's offense has been struggling. A lot of slow starts literally in every week, except for the Southern game but that's definitely going to be a big problem. Florida's defense, I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I think that Florida's offense is going to really rely heavily on the run game. I would hope that LSU would do that as well, but the running game hasn't been great as all. I know that you touched about that. You have guys you have John Emery back there, who's a 5-star recruit, hasn't played like one. It's been, has a touchdown every once in a while, but isn't really consistent. I think that the play of Jane Daniels, has been up and down. I know a lot of people think that they should make the change, but I don't think it really matters. I'm going to go with LSU in this one. My confidence in that one is probably 40%. I don't really have enough confidence in that one, but I got to pick up a game here. I know that you picked Florida, so I'm just really desperate to go with LSU here. We'll see. I know that LSU has won, really has dominated the series couple outside of 5 years. So I think, LSU rolling off 2 straight wins in 2 years against the Gators. It's a tough environment. It's on the road in the swamp at night. Going to be a tough crowd. So I think LSU gets it done like 21-17, a very sloppy game, but a very defensive battle like always. And Chet is going to go with the Tigers. So you're going to be the lone Gator here. So you have opportunity yourself to pick up a game if LSU can't get it done on the road. So if LSU can't get it done, then there's going to be a lot of question marks in BR come next Monday.
And another wrinkle to this one is, of course, LSU will be playing Billy Napier, who has a lot of personal interest in Louisiana, being the former UL Lafayette coach, a potential candidate for the LSU job. He kind of got snubbed, so this will be a great chance for him to prove it to LSU. And then also, he's playing against a few guys that he coached at UL, and Kyron Lacey and Mekhi Garner, as well as his big-time recruit, Trevor Etienne. I wouldn't be surprised if Etienne gets, 3 or 4 more extra carries this week just based off of momentum. And, determination. So
Hey, you bring up a good point. I think that Billy Napier, all what you brought up, this is a proving game for him as a head coach of a university just down the road. Didn't take a chance on him. So definitely be sure to tune into that one, ESPN at 6. So we'll go on to the next ranked versus ranked matchup that we have here in the SEC. It's our annual crossover rivalry between Mississippi State and Kentucky. And Mississippi State has dominated the Cats in the past couple of years. Number 16 is Mississippi State. Number 22 is Kentucky. Like we mentioned, State is one of the hottest teams in college football. Going up against Kentucky is off a 2-game losing skid. So do you have the Cats, bouncing back? You have, State just continuing their dominance.
I got to go with the team that's hot right now, and that's Mississippi State. It doesn't look like Will Levis is going to be playing. If he is, he'll still kind of be nursing that finger injury. He dislocated it against the other Mississippi school. So tough luck there for the Wildcats, but they looked pretty lifeless against South Carolina. The Gamecocks attacked Kentucky with their run game. We know Mississippi State won't do it like that, but they will get the running backs involved out of the backfield. And, this offense is just tough to stop anyway. So I'm going to go with the Bulldogs in this one. I think they'll take this one by at least 10 points.
Yeah, I think that Mississippi State dominates Kentucky. Kentucky just hasn't been looking like the same team that they had in the first couple of weeks. I think that Will Rogers continues to be him against Kentucky defense. It's been struggling as well. I think, with Will Levis, without Will Levis, I think Mississippi State's offense will be able to put up points. Give me 42-20 Mississippi State. I think they continue on teams. So I'm going to go with Mississippi State on the road. And then Chet is also going to go with the Bulldogs as well. So clean sweep here for Mississippi State. And that will be it for our Week 7 games here in the SEC. Before we get into looking outside the SEC, my mom made a point about LSU. Everyone needs to play all 4 quarters, team effort. Yeah, if LSU doesn't play a clean 4 quarters, you got to start off fast at some point. You can't always go down. Literally in every game, they've been down. So you can't do that against a Florida team. Especially at home, when they're playing at the Swamp. So, yeah, if everyone doesn't play 4 quarters, then LSU is not winning the game on Saturday. So, we'll get into looking outside the SEC, which is brought to you by Righteous Felon Craft Jerky, some of the best beef jerky around. You can head on over to www.righteousfelon.com and use promo code OCSN for 15% off your purchase. All right. I know we're an SEC show, but we got some real good games outside of the SEC. All ranked versus ranked matchups, and boy, I am loving this as a college football fan. I'm dubbing this as Statement Saturday. Literally every year I dub a week as Statement Saturday, and this just feels like an easy one. So we'll move on to the Big Ten. We have a top 10 matchup here. This is a big one in the Big Ten East. The winner of this controls their destiny in that division. Jacobs, Penn State and Nittany Lions, number 10 at number 5, Michigan. Now, Michigan was the team that you had in the preseason in your playoffs, so I'm sure you'll be rolling with the Wolverines if you're trying to boost them into the playoff here.
Yeah, Penn State has been really impressive as of late. Michigan's kind of cooled off. They didn't really play anybody to start the year. When I made that prediction, it looked really good. But now that they've played some teams, with over 20,000 students enrolled, it's not been as good. So, but I got to trust in the hype around Michigan. I think that they figure it out and win a grind fest here. I think it'll be kind of low scoring. But Blake Corum has been really, really good for Michigan. I think they'll rely on him and that run game to sneak a win against Penn State.
Yeah, definitely. And Blake Corum has been the star of the show there for the offensive side. I think that be a defensive battle, like you mentioned. This just feels like a prototypical Big Ten game where the winner will probably get 20 and then the loser will probably score like a 17, something like that. I'm going to go with Penn State on the road. I think the veteran experience at the quarterback is what really boosts Penn State on the offensive side. Michigan and J.J. McCarthy, this is really his first big test. I know that they played Maryland. I know they played in Indiana. But Penn State's defense is far beyond better than both of those defenses. So, Michigan, we've seen them struggle in those two Big Ten games that I mentioned. I think that on the road, it's a very hostile environment. I think that Penn State has the veteran bunch to really combat that. So I'm going to go with the Nittany Lions on the road, and Chet is also going to go with Penn State. So you have another opportunity to get a game in this one. Michigan is the home favorite in this one. So Chet and I are rolling with the upset, and you're going to roll with the Wolverines. And next, we'll move on to the big game in the Big 12 here. This just feels like a prototypical Big 12 championship game. I just feel like the winner in this one is for sure going to be in Arlington. I would definitely be shocked if one of them isn't. We have number 8 Oklahoma State traveling to number 13 TCU, battle of undefeateds. You got the Cowboys going to roll with the Frogs.
I got to go with TCU here at home. If it was at Oklahoma State, I'd probably go with the Cowboys. We haven't heard as much about Oklahoma State as I think we have about TCU here in recent weeks. But both of these teams really look good. But to me, TCU is a more complete football team. I trust their defense a little bit more. We saw Oklahoma State nearly get upset by Central Michigan. So certainly they can be beat. But, these teams are going to – we'll see who wins on Saturday. But both of these teams are going to be chased down by Texas and Baylor down the stretch. And, if they were to slip against one of those teams, it would be really important to pick up a win this week. So whoever wins this week really almost is a lock for the Big 12 championship because, whoever loses will have one loss, and then we already have Baylor and Texas with a loss. So this is huge for positioning in the standings.
Yeah, this is going to be, two good quarterbacks here. Max Duggan on TCU side and then Spencer Sanders on the other side. Like you mentioned, Oklahoma State's defense can't really stop anyone. They've just been giving up 30 points a game. TCU's defense, just coming off of a game that gave up 31. I think that their defense is a hit and miss every week. But I just think that this is going to be a high-scoring shootout. This is going to be like a, normal Big 12 game. I think that TCU will win this one. It'll be close. I'm really high on Oklahoma State, but I think TCU has just been rolling. They have the momentum, and they're at home. If this was at Stillwater, I would pick Oklahoma State. But I'll go with TCU, give them the 42-38 win over the Cowboys. And Chet's also going to roll with TCU as well for no love for Oklahoma State on the show here as we're all rolling with the Frogs once again. And now we're going to go on to a big game here in the ACC. No, we're not talking about the Clemson Tigers. We're talking about the Syracuse Orange, baby. They're hosting the number 15 NC State Wolfpack, and Syracuse is undefeated. NC State coming off of a crazy win over Florida State. So are you going to roll with the Orange in the Dome, or are you going to go with NC State pulling off the upset?
I'm going to go with Syracuse. They have a really good running attack. And quietly sitting there at number 18. They look really, really good. I think they can beat North Carolina State here, and then they'll get a date against Clemson here in a couple of weeks. So look out for the Battle of the Orange in that game. But I think Syracuse knocks off the Wolfpack. The Wolfpack, their only slip up this year is against Clemson, but they've had a couple close games. Including last week against Florida State. So I think they come up just short. This is a tough road environment, a lot of travel, and I think it looks good for the Orange.
Yeah, for SEC fans, if you're not familiar with Syracuse's quarterback, it's Garrett Schrader, who was formerly the Mississippi State quarterback. You remember that play against Kansas State where he helicoptered to try and get that first down. But I think this is going to be a very defensive battle. I think two defenses have been playing solid. I think the two running games are going to be prevalent in this one. But I'm going to go with Syracuse at home. I think that this has been an under-the-radar team that really no one's been talking about. I mean, look at this. I mean, you have Syracuse ranked, Kansas ranked, and Illinois ranked. Like, usually we see them in basketball rankings, but not in football rankings. So definitely a wacky year. A lot of parity in college football. I'm going to go with Syracuse at home. And so will Chet. So we're all drinking the orange juice for the Syracuse Orange as we think they get it done at home against NC State this weekend. And to close things out of the top games outside of the SEC, we have a late night in the Pac-12. Number 7 USC and number 20 Utah. And this feels as well, whoever wins this one, especially USC, especially for their playoff hopes, they could definitely use this huge win as well. But Utah at home, especially at night, it's a tough place to play, but you got the Trojans or you got the Utes in this one.
I'm going to go with Southern Cal in this one. I mean, this team just looks like the most complete team in the conference. Although UCLA looks really good, UCLA beat Utah last week, so might be an LA showdown for the conference title. They'll play in the regular season as well. But yeah, Utah just doesn't look quite as good as we thought they would in the preseason. And Southern Cal, led by Caleb Williams, this offense looks really good. So they're getting instant results for Lincoln Riley in year one, and I think they continue to roll.
Yeah, I mean the preseason, you know me, I was high on this Utah team. I think that hype has really left the building for me. I've jumped on this Southern Cal train, so I think that they're going to get it done. I think that Cam Rising will be able to score points and keep up with USC, but Utah's defense, usually it's Kyle Whittingham has one of the best defenses in the country. Not really the case this year. They lost a lot of talent, especially at the linebacker position last year. So I think that USC and Caleb Williams, they have experience in big games. So I think that USC is a tough environment. It's going to be close. I'm going to go with USC continuing the undefeated stretch. And Chet's going to also roll with the Trojans. We're all fighting on this weekend and going with USC. So that will close out our top games out the SEC. We'll definitely be tuning in on the couch and watching these 7 ranked versus ranked matchups that we have this weekend. So we'll move on to hot topics before we close the show here. The first 2 ones we'll just go through briefly. We've talked about this throughout the show. The Razorbacks, KJ Jefferson is expected to be back versus BYU, so that's going to be big news for Arkansas if they want to pull off the road. Not really even going to call it an upset, just a road win to get back on track before they get back on SEC play. The next one is around Alabama starting quarterback Nick Saban is hopeful that Bryce Young will be ready for the matchup against the Volunteers. I would definitely, but if he's not, then I'm changing to Tennessee. There's no way that Alabama rolls in there with a backup quarterback and beats them. So my surrounded that Bryce Young's going to be healthy. But if we get, another factor, then I'm changing my pick to Tennessee. So speaking of Tennessee, I just have a simple question for you. Can Tennessee win the SEC East? That feels really easy, but look at their schedule. They still got everything in front of them.
Yeah, they certainly have a lot of tough games coming up, but yeah, I think they can. I mean, this is hurdle number 1. You got to beat Alabama, but then you do have to go on the road to Georgia. So even if you beat Alabama, that's great. But whoever wins that Tennessee and Georgia game will, in all likelihood, be representing the East in Atlanta. I do know that Georgia has a few tough games in their own right. They do have to play against Mississippi State, I believe. And then we got to assume that they're going to beat Tennessee. So, yeah, this will be a big test for the Vols. If they come up just short, they still have everything to play for. If they win, they still have to handle business against the rest of the East.
Yeah, I think that the next 3 weeks are going to be big for Tennessee. Even if they go undefeated, I think that they're going to be the number 1 team in the country, no doubt. I mean, you're going to beat the number 3 team this week, and then you're going to face the number 1 team on the road in a couple of weeks. So if you beat them, that Tennessee's going to have arguably one of the best resumes by far, depending if Penn State can beat Ohio State and Michigan the next couple of weeks. So yeah, Tennessee's got everything in front of them. So I think that this is their best chance. They have the talent on both sides to win the SEC East, compete with Georgia this year. So the last question I have for you is, and our viewers as well, if you want to answer this, who's your midseason SEC Player of the Year so far? We're halfway through. So you got winning the SEC Player of the Year.
I got to give the SEC Player of the Year right now to Hendon Hooker. I just think that he's been the most complete player in the conference. Runner-up would probably be Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone highly impactful, but those are the 2 names to me that stand out. I just think Hooker has meant the most to his team. But who's your pick?
I actually got Hendon Hooker as well, but I think a name that to be mentioned is Will Rogers. I think his stats-wise are good enough for SEC Player of the Year, but I think really when you look at SEC Player of the Year, the winner of it has been, the SEC champion. Mississippi State, if you're looking at their schedule, they still have to play Ole Miss, have to play Alabama next week, have to play Georgia. So those are the 3 games that they have still left on their schedule, and they already have one loss. So I think that Will Rogers will have the stats to do it, but right now I'm going to go with Hendon Hooker. I think, especially if Tennessee can beat Alabama, I think they're good enough to beat Georgia down the road. So I think right now it'd have to be Hendon Hooker for me, but I think if Mississippi State can pull off a couple of upsets, I think it's got to be Will Rogers. But for now, I'll ride with you, go with Hendon Hooker as well. So that's all the hot topics. We'll skip through the answering questions. We don't really have any comments that popped up, but no disregards to that. So that'll be the end of our show for week 7. So if you want to find our other shows, we have Sports Scramble. You can find that and follow us on Twitter at Sports Scramble 4 and listen wherever you listen to your podcasts. Don't even look at the screen because I forgot to change this slide. Next week, we will review week 7 in the
7 and 8.
and look forward to week 8. I just completely forgot about this. But thank you for tuning into the show and hope you enjoyed the rest of your week. And boy, we got a good week of football for you. So once Saturday comes, I'm going to be probably like 12 hours on my couch just locked in onto my TV. So hope you all have a great rest of your week. And we'll see you back here next Tuesday night here on SEC Talk. Have a good one.